Swords, boards, spells, dragons, big open maps, exotic creatures to ride or slay, different races and classes to play, strange locations to discover and explore. It even has a cooperative multiplayer component that doesn't feel slapped on. Dragon Age Inquisition should have been a perfect game. After 75 long but very enjoyable hours, I've drawn a close to my first Dragon Age Inquisition playthrough. I say first because I'm definitely going to be playing a second round as soon as I free up 50 to 100 hours. 50 hours if you skip a ton of the side quests, near 100 if you don't. It is epic. Without mincing words, I can easily say that Dragon Age Inquisition is probably my favorite game of 2014, but that is not a statement saying that the game is without flaws or that it's for everyone. Far from it. Dragon Age Inquisition has a ton of problems, but in the end, I feel its victories far outweigh its failures. For those new to the series, Dragon Age Inquisition is a role-playing game by BioWare, the masterminds behind a lot of my favorites like Baldur's Gates 1 and 2, Neverwinter Nights, the original Knights of the Old Republic, and the Mass Effect series, just to name a few. But their reputation for creating role-playing masterpieces has been marred since their acquisition by EA in 2011, when the company started releasing games that simply haven't held up to their classic standards. In Dragon Age Inquisition, you are the Inquisitor, charged with finding and stopping the root of an ancient resurrected evil. You and your ragtag group of adventurers travel the continent following up leads, gathering resources, and of course, true to RPG form, doing a whole lot of fetch and letter quests. I tested the game on the PC, and the game is nothing short of gorgeous. There are plenty of options to tinker with if you're not seeing the best performance on your rig, but I was regularly running north of the 45 frames per second mark. Environments are jam-packed with extra foliage. Environmental effects like heavy nighttime rain add to the immersion. The world is so fantastic, it's like constantly walking through paintings brought to life. And the soundtrack might also be one of my favorites of the year, along with Child of Light, though the main theme does sound awfully similar to Pippin's song from Return to the King. But aside from the soundtrack, the sound design is off the charts, with great spell and battle effects. Large demons and dragons let loose toe-curling roars that sound amazing when blasted loudly. The voice acting is definitely solid too, though a few characters' deliveries fall a little bit flat. Once again, like Shepard from Mass Effect, I feel the female avatar voiceovers are better than the male ones. At 50 to 100 hours, there's a lot to do if monster hunting and dungeon crawling is your sort of thing, but a good portion of it is fluff. The worst part is, it's unnecessarily fluff. Though the overall story of Inquisition is okay, it's handled sloppily, and this is where a lot of the unnecessary fluff comes into play. Within the first few hours of the game, you're everyone's enemy with amnesia, and then you're making decisions for the Inquisition as you are quickly absolved of your very serious accusations, and not long after that, you're leading the Inquisition, making major political and military decisions that alter world governments with a brain injury. There's no subtlety or nuance here. At first, it's go, 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 and then the story just coasts for a little while until it picks up again towards the end. The major points needed to be spread out more to make the experience more digestible and lasting. BioWare has got to stop leaning on the amnesia crutch for their stories. At first, it might have been their thing, but at this point, the story is greatly damaged by it. A major portion of the story is seeking to recover your lost memories, but when you finally remember what you repressed, it's such a ho-hum, who cares kind of moment. It would have been much more interesting and entertaining to have your character fight for real absolution, and then plead to the world governments for the approval to kickstart the Inquisition and then build it. That would have paced the story better, and left fewer gaps in this very long saga. But the pacing problem doesn't exist solely within the story, it's also where the game sends you, and in what order. Very early in the game, players are whisked away to the Hinterlands, an almost intimidatingly large open map just brimming with side quests, but it's only to accomplish a relatively small mission. The game does a poor job telling the player that they don't need to stay in the Hinterlands for long. I asked a few family members who were also playing the game at the same time as myself, and they too spent a disproportionate amount of time in the map, thinking they were doing the right thing. In reality, the game picks up and becomes infinitely more entertaining once you leave the Hinterlands, which can, of course, always be returned to for extra supplies and experience when the player feels like exploring. But without knowing this, gamers can spend a dozen hours or more, like I did, just doing side quests that have little or nothing to do with the main story with a party they might not like. There are plenty of other maps, more interesting ones too, that the game could have sent the player to warm up to the open map gameplay style of Inquisition. While I'm listing shortcomings, there are a few control issues that I pray are either patched or modded. For starters, the new way to find items in the environment is to hit the V key, which fires out a sort of echolocation mechanic to highlight interactable objects. It's similar to what was used in The Witcher 2, but to a lesser effect. Here, players need to practically spam the V key wherever they go as they're walking. Using this over the gigantic maps for over 50 hours becomes absolutely irksome. The mechanic needs to be wiped and replaced with a toggle highlight interactive objects on and off. To add to this index finger exercise, the game desperately needs an auto-loot system. A good portion of Inquisition, players will be bending over to pick things up, and then clicking to approve the items they want. Even clicking the quicker loot all option becomes just too much. Players can then sort through their bags between missions or at their home base to see what goodies they've found and then set the rest of the junk to sell. With this new Dragon Age clearly taking inspiration from MMOs, it is odd that an auto-loot system isn't already in place. And finally, though it's nice to see a jump function brought to the Dragon Age series, it needs refinement. Many of the more precise jumps the game requires to gather up its collectibles are frustratingly out of reach due to the lightning-quick, instant up-down nature of this jump. Many of these gaps are clearly not designed with gamers primarily using a mouse and keyboard as their primary input. Otherwise, the controls for the game are okay. Hotkeys for recharging spells or abilities, and left-clicking for pretty much everything else. It's not rocket science. For players who want a tougher experience, there is a tactical pause system in place. I only played the game on normal difficulty without using this system. I can't speak for higher difficulties. Though that may sound like a lot, to me it wasn't enough to spoil my experience with the game. I was glued to the screen, seeing the decisions I made in the original Dragon Age having a massive effect on the story. But if you happen to have lost your save file, fear not, Dragon Age actually has a very clever and useful website called Dragon Age Keep that allows players to input all the decisions from Dragon Ages 1 and 2 and import them into the game. Inquisition isn't short on its own hard decisions. I regret some of the irreversible choices I made, which is an emotion that many games haven't made me feel. Regret. Many games can make you rage, or make you feel sorrow for death of a character, or happy, but regret is something very specific that's hard to nail. I love the character development in the game, mostly my own character, though I wish I could have remodeled or reclassed her after I put about 20 hours in. For those curious, there is a very simple respec option in the game that allows players to play with other skills within their class, but sadly nothing that can be done about awkward-looking characters, or if you ever want to change classes entirely. Discovering each personality was part of the fun of the game. It's great to see a few returning faces from past games, though I wish a few others stayed in the past. The cooperative multiplayer is much more satisfying than I originally thought it would be, but a few things hold it back from greatness. There is a limited number of map variations, the looting and leveling is pretty grindy, and many of the random people I met playing the game didn't know how to play a cooperative game cooperatively. Communities can make or break games like this, so I would recommend trying this out with a friend unless you really have no other option. But otherwise, it adds on hours to an already gigantic game. It's big, intimidatingly big, but its bigness is part of the appeal. This is the type of grand fantasy adventure I was hoping to see more of in video games, but sadly fantasy RPGs aren't as hot as they used to be. There are some rough edges, but I can't help but love it. It's fun to play and explore and read all the lore and customize almost everything about it to your personal style, from how your character looks to what drapes are hung in your great hall or how you want to punish people from your throne. The War Room, complete with counselors, is not only a neat way to view the world map, but it makes you feel lordly as you send troops in mini-missions to garner support for your cause. It's a deadly combination of escapism and empowerment wrapped in a highly polished fantasy shell. Is it as good as the original Dragon Age? No, but it is a fine game that has me a little hopeful for the future of BioWare. This video is made possible through generous fan donations on Patreon.